Hello and welcome to Sea Views. I'm Julia Gosling and I'm here today with Adam Parnell, my co-host from Chirp. Hello, Adam.
How are you doing? All right?
Great today, thank you. And I'm really pleased we have Simon Adams with us today. Simon from the USV Group. Hello, Simon.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us. So we're going to have to start acronyms early on, aren't we? So USV, unmanned or uncrewed surface vessels. That's what we're going to be talking about today.
That's right.
But lots of acronyms and actually lots of different terms for this type of vessel. So I'm guessing perhaps, Simon, you want to kick off and just tell us a little bit of a definition of the USV.
Yes, of course. And there are lots of them out there. USVs, AUVs, ASVs. But primarily what we're talking about today is going to be USVs, which are uncrewed surface vessels.
Great. That's a good thing to start off with, I think. And then, Simon, you started the USV Group, your company. And I wonder, can you give us a little bit of an idea about what you do, what the organisation is about?
Yeah, of course. So the USV Group started in April 2025, and it was primarily designed at helping businesses make the step from traditional operations into uncrewed or remote and autonomous operations. I'd been through the journey many times myself for a number of companies that I was working for. And I found that we were always coming up against the same kind of challenges. So I decided to step out and start the USV Group as a consultancy that helps anyone and everyone that wants to be involved in the USV sector.
And talk a little bit more about that sector. I mean, before we dive into the detail, I mean, how big a sector is it? If you've got any numbers?
Yeah, so it's growing all the time. I think politically speaking, because of the way that things are happening globally, especially in the defense sector, with a lot of conflict and quite an unstable environment that we live in today, there's a huge amount of investment in the defense sector. The commercial sector, unusually, was at the USV piece a little bit before it, although USVs were always lurking in the background in defense. But I think it really got publicized a lot more in the commercial space, and that's where significant investment was coming in. I don't have fixed numbers for you, but I know that we're going into the billions when we look at the potential markets as we go forwards in the next 5 years.
Wow.
I'm guessing you're talking about pounds or dollars there, not necessarily vessels, right?
That's right, pounds and dollars. It is big business. There's a lot of venture capital going into this. So a lot of people seeing quite a bright future for the USV space.
And just because many of our listeners won't necessarily know, or they might have an idea in their own heads what it is we're talking about, can you describe to people what the typical characteristic of a USV might be? Obviously, apart from the fact it doesn't have people on board.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, we have to start with that. What is a USV? So an uncrewed surface vessel. Well, it's uncrewed. That means there's nobody on it. It's a surface vessel. So that means it specifically stays on the surface of the water. And it's a vessel. So it is a vessel, not a vehicle. Some people call them vehicles in America. I think our regulators like the term vessel. So it is a seaborne vessel that we would traditionally know as from a seafarer's perspective.
And is it simply that? Is it simply just a traditional vessel without people on it, or are they completely different beasts?
It could be. So there are USVs that are just that. They're converted tugboats, or they're existing small vessels that have automation sequences applied to them. Or because you don't have to have people on it, it can be much smaller. So you can look at the design morphology. You can actually take away the bridge of a ship. If you take away the galley and you take away the accommodation spaces, that opens up a lot more room for other types of, lost my words there a bit. You'll have to edit that. It opens up the scope for having different kinds of payloads.
Okay, so some vessels are actually, like you say, sort of converted, as it were, and others would be specifically designed to never host any crew at all.
That's right. That's exactly it. So I think if we look at USV development from the beginning at the front end, they started as relatively small units. So we're talking, sub 5 meters. And these small units were sent out to be operated in a line of sight context. So that means, it's literally a radio controlled boat. So someone could stand at the harbour side holding your remote controller and drive a boat around the marina. And I think the progressions from there have enabled what we have today, which are now creeping up towards the sort of 24, 25 meter mark. And in some countries, they're even developing uncrewed ferries and A to B, point to point services that they can then work with and develop to try and generate the confidence in the insurance in the platforms.
Okay. Yeah, interesting.
That is fascinating. So is there, I mean, what is the commercial vision for these? Is there sort of sectors they can be used in, sectors they can't be used in?
Yeah, so if we look at the early adopters in the commercial sector, that was primarily the people that are out on the sea to gather data. So my background was driving research vessels. So I was a master by trade, and I would spend quite a long time driving up and down lines and grids. And that could be for the purpose of anchor positioning. It could be for rig positioning. It could be for construction and development of wind farms. All these kind of areas need to get that data of where the seabed is, what it's like, how deep it is, what's the nature of the seabed, where's the bedrock, where can they pile, where can they drive, where can they build these things offshore. And that includes the cable industry. Mm-hmm. So I would drive these survey boats around and we'd scan the seabed, we'd recover the data, process it, and then that goes forth and into the supply chain. So I think USVs were primarily set up to kind of accommodate these tasks, because you don't have to have anything too fancy that's going to run the payloads. If a payload is operated by a PC as a multi-beam sensor that would scan the seabed, we can already remote into that. So it's a relatively easy way to get into the remote and autonomous sector. I think as we go forwards, if we look at things like tugboats and things that need physical interactions, that's a lot harder. And I think that's going to come a lot later on, if at all.
Yeah.
So there are sectors that come in and some that are excluded for that reason.
Yeah, it's got some real potential, hasn't it, still, because obviously there's the defence and military interest, but commercially and scientifically, but commercially the subsea cables. I was absolutely amazed. I was at a Women in Maritime event in December at the National Oceanography Centre in Southampton, and I was surprised to find out that 97% of data globally comes through subsea cables still. And I was actually surprised. I thought, well, we have more satellite technology now, and I thought that wouldn't be quite as high, but it's a huge part of the world, isn't it? And an enormous industry.
Yeah, it is. It's huge, and it will be for a while, I think. Even though we've got so many satellites up above, it wasn't long ago that, we were still installing Atlantic cables between New York and the UK so that traders could trade milliseconds earlier by having a better connection. Yeah. So there are lots of justifications and reasons that we don't necessarily consider in our day-to-day lives.
So you've mentioned research, you've mentioned sort of, I guess you mean bathymetry and hydrography and all those sort of things. You've mentioned defence and the conflicts and the use of them there. You've mentioned ferries. Like, where else could we use these, USVs commercially?
I think if we look at the Met Ocean measurement in a little bit more detail, there's quite a lot going on in that space as well. So you have companies producing smaller USVs. So Ocean, based down in Plymouth, they're providing small sail-powered USVs that go out and take ocean measurements. And by distributing a constellation of these nodes, they can actually help with weather prediction and understand our ocean currents a bit more. So early warning systems for inclement weather, for example, there are unlimited number of ways that we can apply these sorts of technologies.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. And you mentioned 24-meter vessels, so I'm guessing these things can carry either quite a lot of cargo or quite a lot of sort of sensors and things as well, right? So and can go into the deep ocean if they're that size.
Yeah, so I think the vessels I'm referring to there, both are coming from Norway. Mm-hmm. The Norwegians are taking a really forward-looking stance on this, and they've created some quite significant platforms that are primarily designed to be remotely operated, so completely unmanned, and they deploy ROVs, which are remotely operated vehicles, just to add a little bit of complexity to that.
Another acronym.
But those have been around for a long time. The ROVs are commonly used. So they're the big swimming robots that are deployed off the side of ships that can have arms and manipulators to carry out tasks below the surface. So in this context, we have an uncrewed surface vessel that's quite significant in tonnage and length, going out offshore with DP capabilities, holding station and deploying a work-class ROV.
Yeah, so DP there, you mean dynamic positioning, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. So, I suppose the other thing to anyone who isn't very knowledgeable in this area, and I probably count myself in there as well, because this is an interesting topic that I don't know a huge amount about. There's nobody on the vessels, but let's talk about the people. What are the people doing? Where are they? How do they work? What are they doing?
So I made the transition from master to remote operations almost accidentally. I happened to be in the right place at the right time. So speaking about the seafarer, where does the seafarer sit in all of this? Well, I think if we look at our regulator stance at the MCA, they are quite steadfast in their approach that whoever is in control of an uncrewed surface vessel needs to have some kind of maritime qualification. So if we think about tonnage and area of operation, that would be the same. So for example, if you want to operate a USV in a harbour, just doing some survey work around your marina, you could get away with a powerboat level 2 with a commercial endorsement. But if you want to have one of these plus 200 ton 26 meter vessels that can deploy an ROV and work in an unlimited area, then you're going to need to increase your tonnage certificates and have an unlimited area of operation. So straight away, there's a step that we can see for traditional seafarers to make towards uncrewed operations, and that will be mandated. And I think as these resolutions go up as far as the IMO and then are distributed to the member states, we're going to see a reflection of that ethos.
So this is a really important point, which I want to dwell on for a moment there, because I think what I'm hearing is, although the vessel itself is uncrewed, there's still human oversight. So we're not talking about robot ships that just go out and do their own thing, or are we?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a significant media gap between what we read and the reality of what's happening out there on the foaming brine. And when I say that, I mean, marketing campaigns are using the word AI and autonomous an awful lot. But the reality is that much of what we do today is remotely operated with assistive tools. And what I mean to say is, if we define what autonomous or automatic or AI means, let's go with autonomous. An autopilot could be argued as being autonomous navigation, an autopilot from a vessel that you're on board. And we're not really doing much different in remote operation. We're just in a different location, looking at the world through cameras and radars and sensors as if we were on board.
Right. So we're talking displaced crews at the moment, not necessarily, like I say, like to use sort of common phrase, a robot ship. This isn't a fire and forget thing where we just say, off you go, you let us know when you're in New York.
Certainly not. I think that there is a lot of misconception at the venture capital end and at the blue sky thinking end that perceive that's what we should be doing. But the operational reality is that we need to monitor these systems because we're just not quite there yet. But at the same time, I don't want to take away or steal any thunder away from those that are developing these autonomous technologies that are truly autonomous. So a few examples would be camera detection systems that can read its environmental situation. So it may be able to classify yachts from fishing vessels or naval ships. And that can happen autonomously through algorithms, through a machine learning process. So there are autonomous capabilities creeping in, but we don't yet have the ability to certify or assure true autonomy.
Okay.
So at the moment, what we can do in the UK is remotely operate with AI assistance and autonomous technology to support us.
So to ask a sort of almost devil's advocate question, and I'm sure you'll have a great answer for this, but what are the benefits of USVs? Because if you've still got effectively a vessel and a crew, and the traditional method is you put the crew in the vessel, and now you're talking about moving the crew ashore, or I'm guessing
On another vessel,
possibly
potentially.
reduced numbers, I'm assuming. But what are the overall benefits? Like, why is this such a large and, frankly, really quickly expanding sector?
Okay, so there are a few. So the first and obvious one is the people are no longer at sea. So there's a safety element there.
Right.
So these seafarers are no longer in the dangerous offshore environment. So that's the first one. The second one is certainly environmental. So if I give you an example of, there's a USV, it's called a Drix. It's built by XAL in France. And the 8-meter unit is capable of doing hydrographic survey. It's quite capable. It can go out and survey for about 5-6 days on 250 litres of fuel. Okay, if you compare that to a manned vessel that can stay at sea for 5 days, and you think about the propulsion units and the power generators that are on board that equivalent size vessel, you're going to be burning cubes of fuel a day. So there's definitely a huge potential for reducing our emissions and our carbon footprints offshore. So that's one.
I'd never thought of that. I'd literally never thought. I mean, I could see the point about you could perhaps squeeze an extra couple of bits of cargo on because, as you say, you don't need galleys, you don't need to have bunk beds, you don't need all the other stuff that the crew need to stay alive. I'd never considered the environmental side of it. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, well, take a look at it. Go and Google Drix, D-R-I-X, and you'll see it's completely wild compared to a traditional vessel. Yeah. Very different, looks more like a submarine.
And I guess these things don't suffer in the same way in terms of like, crew fatigue, because I'm guessing if you've got the crew ashore, you can actually give them a better quality of life, whether if you're like off watch.
That's a really interesting area because you would think so on the face of it. However, if you are on a container ship and you're doing a 12-hour watch, yes, you're confined to the ship, but you are in a dynamic environment. Okay, if you try sitting that 12-hour watch in your office that has screens showing you the external environment, I think you'll find it much harder. So I think the ergonomics of remote operation centers and the way in which we operate and we make that transition from the bridge to the remote operation center needs really careful consideration. So it does yield the opportunity to play with the shifts. Okay, we can reduce to 8-hour shifts. Maybe we can have a remote operation center in one country and we can follow the sun by handing over to another remote operation center across the Atlantic, for example. So we can play with the shifts a little bit. So potentially you could have 3 8-hour shifts that all take place in daylight during office hours.
Yeah.
In their respective nations.
So you're getting the whole biorhythm thing and the human side of it being addressed.
That's really right, because I mean, there is data to support that people that work night shifts aren't necessarily going to live as long as those that work day shifts.
Yeah.
I mean, there's also data. I mean, this goes way back to, I think, the 50s, where I think the pit ponies working in mines were given better working conditions and hours than seafarers are today, believe it or not. So I think there's opportunity.
That's a quote.
They didn't think they were going to learn this today, did they?
That's for sure.
Yeah, so I wonder if we could talk a little bit more about taking people out of these risky environments. So military obviously have got purposes for that, but can we talk a bit more about that, the benefits of taking the person away from some dangerous situation?
Well, yeah, I mean, military is pretty self-explanatory, and I think we've already seen some single-use USVs, should we call them, operated in the war with Ukraine and Russia. That's made pretty big press. But then I think, in mine countermeasures, this area has been actually working in the USVs way before the commercial sector ever got their hands on it. So I think developments in those spaces are going to be right on the doorstep, if not already. I think I read somewhere recently that Thales have just scooped a $10 million deal with the defense sector for providing remote operation centers for their mine countermeasure vessels. So straight away, there's going to be benefits to the supply chain in that defense sector. But back in the commercial space, it's really more about, taking people out of that environment if they don't really need to be there. So there are hybrid variations also. So lean crewing, where maybe you'll still have a vessel on site, but it might be that the operations team are actually remote. So that's another way that we're working with remote operations.
Adam, with your naval background, you can see the benefit there of not wanting to sit on a mine-sweeping vessel yourself.
Yeah, no, I used to drive. People that have listened to this podcast in the previous episodes will know I've talked about my time as driving a mine hunter in conflict areas. And actually, I think this is an amazing place to be working. And I'm really pleased to see the Defence have taken that up because, when you've got an entire crew and the privations the crew have to undertake in a minefield in terms of sleeping above the waterline and doing all these different things, it's not just a case of going up mindlessly up and down, sort of pulling some sort of sensor or sonar. It's actually your entire way of life while you're on that operation is affected. And so you're right. I mean, and of course in the extremists, if you get it very badly wrong, it's pink mist time. So actually removing people from that sort of that activity has got to be a good thing.
Yeah, I suppose there's surveillance as well, isn't there? Because you mentioned earlier, Simon, that the world is seeing conflict. There is territorial disputes all over the place. There's issues with fishing areas, with all kinds of things at sea. So using some of these uncrewed vessels for sort of surveillance and checking territories aren't being, what's the word?
No, you're right. I mean, if we look at the Atlantic Bastion project, so that's a surveillance-based project where we're looking at, monitoring for Russian intrusions and actually just monitoring their progress as they make their transit through the North Atlantic. So we know that Trump has a significant interest in Greenland, and if you draw a line between Greenland and the UK, I mean that entire region needs to be monitored. So yeah, there's a huge amount of consideration and surveillance, and I think the USVs are going to play a vital role in that.
Yes, because surveillance requires persistence, and I'm guessing if you remove the human out of the equation and not have to think about shore leave or fatigue in that respect, you've got a vessel that potentially could stay on station for weeks, months. I mean, I don't know.
Absolutely right. Yeah. If you don't have to have, the numbers of cabins and bunks and the bridge, you can replace those areas with either fuel cells. They could be additional methods of generating energy with a vessel that's of a significant size. So it could be solar arrays, or it could have wind power arrays that also charge hybrid propulsion systems, enabling them to stay out for much, much longer.
Interesting. Cool. Previous episode we did was search and rescue, international search and rescue. I was wondering if an uncrewed vessel was out at sea, could it play any part in reporting or assisting in an operation if they came across another vessel or person in distress?
You're absolutely right. I think it's a great idea, and there is even mandate by the MCA in Workboat Code 3 that USVs are to be able to respond and lend assistance where they can. So there are a number of ways of doing that. You can voluntarily carry life-saving apparatus, so you can put LSA on board, although you are exonerated from it in the regulation. But I think there really is a strong opportunity for lending assistance, particularly in search and rescue. So if you're fitting an uncrewed vessel with an IR camera, for example, you can see a couple of miles pretty well at night, provided you get the height of the camera somewhere decent. So, for helping with search and rescue and finding people in the water, I think that's an absolute no-brainer. I think we should be doing that.
It's interesting.
And there are actually companies that are actively building USVs that are designing them to even scoop people out of the water.
Wow.
On conveyor belts. So yeah, there's a bit of traction there. It's not just the USVs themselves, but the technology that is being applied to support USVs can actually be taken off and applied on even manned vessels. So these kind of camera technologies, these camera detection systems that can detect people in the water, I think they're going to be really useful too.
That's really fascinating.
That is fascinating. So SOLAS, though, says, obviously the law, we might call it the law of the sea, but you have to give assistance to mariners who are in distress. I mean, would it actually apply to a uncrewed vessel?
I think it does to the extent where it's practicable, because it's no good saying, "Oh well, sorry, we're a USV. We're not obliged to apply, so you can't just drive past a burning tanker." The least you can do is maintain position and provide communication nodes, or reporting the situation to the Coast Guard, for example. You still carry the same, humane responsibilities that you would, in the same way that you'll still have to comply with the coal regs.
Yes.
You're a surface vessel. You have to apply with the collision regulations, and this is going to be mandated from the top down, I believe. So you still have a responsibility.
I suppose they still would they all have AIS or radar reflectors, or how would other vessels spot them?
Yep, so they should have AIS. They certainly should. And I think the further offshore you go and the more meaningful the vessels become, the more ship-like they may appear digitally. So they're still going to have a radar reflection. They're still going to have to carry radar reflectors and radars and VHF communications that's actually relayed to the shore-based remote operations center. So you should be able to identify the USV by a radar reflection. You should then be able to find out its AIS signature and get the details, and you should be able to call it up. I think certainly for anything that's doing meaningful work offshore, whereas if you see a little putt-putt in the marina, it's probably not going to have that, because these relay stations are expensive. To get VHF comms back to a remote operations center, you need to really commit to it and do it properly.
No, I'm really glad you brought that up, because we've received a couple of reports probably a couple of months ago now, but where manned vessels, crewed vessels, were coming across these USVs and then saying, "Oh, well, it was acting erratically and I didn't know what it was going to do, so I didn't know what I could do either." And of course, one of the things that we learned when we were analysing that and investigating it was that, well, why didn't you just call on the radio like you normally would, like a normal vessel? And honestly, they were like, "Oh, I didn't think of that, because it's a USV, right? There's nobody on it to reply." So I'm really pleased that you've brought out that point, that they have these relay stations that actually you can call them up.
They certainly should, and certainly if they're going to be working in an area where there is going to be traffic, they are going to come across traffic. Yeah. I think, again, through regulation and the permissions that are granted to USV operators, they're either going to be completely independent and they're going to have all of these resources and features and facilities where you can communicate with them as if it were a normal vessel, or it's going to be operating in very close proximity to a guard vessel or a mothership that it may be deployed from or may be being operated from. Right. And then that mothership assumes the responsibility for the communication for that USV.
We're myth-busting.
Yeah, we are myth-busting. But actually, if you're talking about myths, I mean, one of the biggest one is, what does this mean for the seafarer? Is it going to take away jobs?
Exactly. Is it going to take the jobs away?
Yeah. The robots are coming to take over the world and all of our jobs are at risk. Well, I mean, I think I'll take a slightly wider philosophy. I mean, we mentioned earlier that, I made that transition, and I think it's open to anyone that wants to make the transition, because seafarers are going to be required. And certainly we're still in a relatively juvenile stage of the USV scene, I think. And if we look at the amount of support that's required for a USV operation to get it going, it uses more people, I think, per head than a traditional vessel would have done. I think that the early costs and the investment to get a project up and rolling is actually quite expensive. And you need a lot of people to do it, because to generate the confidence and boost the assurance for clients and end users, we generally have to have support vessels with us. Yeah. So, for example, in Q3 last year, I went to supervise a job in Germany, and the German authorities demanded that an STCW master was on a support vessel within close proximity to the USV, even though the USV was being controlled from another country, and the pilots, well, it had the potential to be controlled from another country. It could have been controlled from anywhere, okay, but we had to do it from a support vessel. So as a result, the support vessel got a charter and was doing something new and interesting. So the crew were really interested. So as we go through this development and integration process of these USVs into industry, these kind of things happen. So So, yeah, I don't think it's taking away anyone's jobs, but I think it gives people the opportunity to make a transition if they choose to.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. The reason I asked that one about the jobs is because depending on which publication you read, they're saying there's going to be something like 90,000 seafarer shortfall very imminently, in fact, across, in the global fleet. And so I just wondered if this was a way to actually get around that, or at least ameliorate that problem.
Partially, yeah, potentially it can. There's a huge skills shortage in the marine sector as a whole. And I do wonder if the USV space is a nice opportunity to help mitigate that, as you say. But, there are a number of different roles that support a USV, not just the officers that are standing watch and the masters that retain overall responsibility, but also what about the technicians that are supporting the USVs from a shore-based perspective? What about the mechanical elements? What about the communication elements? We've got a lot of complex computer networking that needs to be done on the USV. We've got traditional propulsion units that need to be serviced. So there are stepping stones to making your way into this.
Well, that was going to be my next question, actually, which is how these vessels maintained, because, as you say, you don't have an engineering department on board.
That's right. So it has to be done. You still have to have a ground team that are going to take that USV from wherever it's launched. If you crane it off a trailer into a marina, you need to get it out of the marina. So then you're going to need a support boat, because I'm pretty sure the harbour master is going to say, no way you're driving that out unattended. Take it out with the support boat. So you need a support boat, okay? And then once you're out in open water, you can hand over control to a remote operations centre. But that ground team need to be there, okay? So you're going to need to do pre-start checks in the same way you did any vessel. And so all of these processes are actually going to be fairly similar. And I think that this makes the adoption process much easier, because it's akin to what we do already. Okay, we're just adding a few more technical elements to that. Okay, we need a little bit more operational consideration of how, what, when, and how we're actually going to do things. So I think if you take chunks out of it like that, it becomes a lot easier. But the kind of people that do this are people that generally have a skill set in a traditional context. So the software engineers are going into marine software engineering, or the mariners are going into remote operations, mechanics, or marine engineers are becoming marine engineers aligned with USVs.
Yeah,
so there are little links there.
So what you're saying, Simon, is it's not necessarily getting rid of people, it's sort of changing the roles a little bit, and there may be just different types of roles available. I mean, personally, I could see it as being able to give people a role who've got their maritime experience who want to work ashore. I mean, for example, if I was a master mariner and I wanted to come ashore and have children, for a few years, but I didn't want to drop my thing that I'd worked in and I was well qualified in, you could be a master mariner and do it from a centre 8 hours a day, for example.
Absolutely right. That's exactly the way it can work. It's not true for all roles. And I think as things get more and more complex and the AI elements and the autonomy elements creep in more and more, I think, not anyone can do it. You do have to have a certain base level of network understanding and IT understanding. And, it's not going to be for everyone.
Oh dear, doesn't sound like it's for me, actually, now you say.
And certainly those with the aptitude for it, I think there'll be opportunity. Right. But I think it's going to create new roles as well, more advanced roles where you will, you are going to need to go and get a degree in something special to be able to facilitate the requirements of the business. Yeah. I mean, and that's when we look at things like automated obstacle avoidance system and some of the really complex areas of true autonomy. I think, there's going to be roadblocks, but some of us are only going to go so far in that area. But certainly from an operational standpoint, we're going to need decent seafarers.
So just to sort of change the subject slightly, what's the next big step? What's the future hold? What can we look forward to?
I think we're going to see a bit of a change in the way in which we see USVs integrating into industry, in the commercial industry. So we've seen the big USVs coming out of Norway. We've got lots and lots of smaller USVs that do a myriad of tasks. And I think there's going to be a bit of a tree shake where we've got a huge number of small USV providers now. I think in the years to come, we may see that change a little bit. I think that we're going to start to see certain USVs really grabbing hold of certain tasks that they carry out, and they're going to do them very well. Okay, and they're going to be pinned down into that kind of area.
Yep.
And I think you're going to see these different USVs kind of starting to slot into different gaps. And then I think we're going to really start to see it in the slightly larger or the larger tonnage areas. But I believe that there's going to be a ceiling on that. And this is just my opinion. But, if you look at the sub 50 meter space, I think that's a good place to be, where we can do meaningful work offshore, whether it's surveillance, data collection, whatever. I think that'll be a popular area for long endurance, persistent operations. But if you think about the container ships of the world, although there may be a few doing point-to-point routes, I don't think that we're likely to see, uncrewed container ships going from China to the UK. And the reason I believe that is because if you look at the value of a voyage like that, and then you look at the cost of the crew to run that voyage, it's nothing. It's a tiny, it's less than 1%. So why go through all of that development pain and cost and assurance expense to mitigate what exactly? What are you actually going to achieve by taking the crew off of a multi-million-dollar transit anyway?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense.
And ultimately, when you're in the middle of the ocean, 1,000 miles from anything, you still need someone to hit something with a hammer if there's a problem.
Yeah, there's there's a limit to what we can do with unattended machinery, isn't there? So,
yeah, that's good. Well, looking ahead as well, we always let our guests choose, if you like, have a wish. What would you choose to change if you could make the industry safer? Is there anything you'd change?
I think I would want to enable the industry. I want to elevate the industry. And I think to do that, I'd like to see regulation change to embrace the development process a little bit more. And what I mean by that is we're unable to meaningfully test in the UK at the moment because you need to have certification issued by the MCA. And that's not easy to get. So if you're developing a product, but you can't go out of port to go and test it, it's very hard to go and gather the evidence required to then provide the assurance to the regulator. Yeah. So we're stuck in a bit of a vicious circle. And what happens in that environment is that operators that want to get on with it, they go outside of the UK where the regulation doesn't exist, and then they go and do it elsewhere. And that poses risk because we have unassured equipment operating in and around people in the water space. So I know that's a double-edged sword because on one hand I'm saying, we can't do it safely here, so we're doing it dangerously elsewhere. That's not quite what I mean. It's more about embracing it so that we can safely test and develop here so that we can reduce the risk when we go elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I think from a safety point of view, that is absolutely vital.
Okay.
I'm glad you said that because that was exactly the thought that was going through my head. But we were sort of talking about lower standards. But I guess without opening up a whole new can of worms, there is an element here about there's going to have to be an international conversation, isn't there, about what does this mean? Probably at the IMO or one of its safety committees, and I know they're exercised about these things because they are quite literally on the horizon.
Yeah,
it is happening. So I have to bring in another acronym, MASS, M-A-S-S, Marine Autonomous Surface Systems or surface ships. That's what IMO are calling it, and they are set to release a MASS code. Okay. And I think the MCA are heavily involved in that. So yeah, we can expect to see something there.
Yeah, some changes are bound to need to come as this is a new industry and, like you said, growing. So fascinating. Oh, it's been so good to cover some of these myths that have sprung up and to learn about the work that you do. I'm really glad you joined us, Simon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot. Thank you.
And also, we're going to leave the bridge, which we do after every episode, but we can just walk straight out and get a coffee, can't we? Because we're not at sea.
That's it. Coffee machines right there.
Thank you so much, Simon.
Fishing vessel Great Northern Aberdeen Coast Guard, we are reading you out and clear.